Welcome and good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a good agenda today and a lot of great stuff to talk about. We also have about 100 people RSVP'd, so people will keep streaming in, but let's go ahead and get started. So, and I have to clear my throat a little bit, so I apologize throughout the meeting today. But welcome and good morning. And our topic today is beneficial electrification. Is it destined to be our industry's new normal? And where does your company stack up? Let's take stock of where we're at today. And are we ready by 2024 and 2020, or excuse me, 2030? So EBC, we're a trade association of the entire supply chain of energy efficiency, and many of us have been in energy efficiency for decades, and now we're seeing rapid changes happening in electrification, in how we use our energy, our building practices as we move towards more sustainable building, as well as more building science focus, higher performance buildings. And what we know is that in 2019, the EEBC, we had our first topic on beneficial electrification because we were wondering what it is and what's happening. And we had energy, excuse me, eSource come and speak to us about it. And today we have eSource coming back a couple of years later to give us an update on where we've come since then. And also, where do our businesses fit into these movements that's happening right now? And how do we prepare our businesses? I think that the EBC, we're the first adopters, the first movers who have been doing energy efficiency for decades in gas, and now we're switching to all these new energy sources. And it's a very exciting time. And one other piece that I like to bring up is Bezos from Amazon had said that the internet and the smartphone was the fastest transition that we've had in our industry or in our history. And now he stated that the Internet of Things is not, well, actually, so he basically said that the energy transition and smart devices now are the fastest moving transition that we've had in history. So things are moving fast. We have an exciting agenda today to talk about it. And with that, what I'd like to do is introduce Barend Dronkers from eSource, and he's going to talk about where we're at and what it looks like going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patricia. Should I share my screen here just to get things
Absolutely
rolling? Okay. So as Patricia shared, I'm Barend Dronkers. I'm with eSource. Been with eSource for just over a year now. Previously on our research team, so I'd be producing research on building electrification, which is sort of a sub-theme of beneficial electrification. We also do a lot of research on transport and industrial electrification. So we kind of see building electrification as a part of the beneficial electrification umbrella. All electrification should be beneficial. We talked mostly about our framework for what we consider to be beneficial in 2019, and I'm here to kind of launch into some of the work we've been doing more recently and kind of the trends that we're seeing. Myself, my background, I'm an engineer. I'm based in Canada, in Calgary, but of course, our main office for eSource is in Colorado. So we've got lots of presence down in your state. And I think we also have a lot of similarities between where I live. We're just right on the Rockies. So it's just a little bit colder here, I guess. So I'll get started. The first thing that I want to start with is, just ask the question, like, why do we care? Why should we care about building electrification? And sort of the 3 points that I like to hit home on are the fact that we need to decarbonize a large part of our building energy loads. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to fuel switch from, predominantly natural gas, but also in other states, particularly Northeast, it's not just natural gas, we're talking propane, delivered fuels, to electric, and then of course, decarbonize the source of that electricity. And so it's kind of a two-pronged approach. And then the second piece, which I think needs to happen at the same time, is we need to make sure that whatever new electric loads we add, they need to be able to interact with the grid and in a way that maintains or in a lot of cases increases the reliability of the grid. And then third but not least, we want to be able to improve the customer experience. So if we're electrifying a building, let's make it a more comfortable building. Let's make it a safer building. Let's make it a cleaner building. So this is of particular relevance during COVID times. There's a lot of technology that's being pushed to clean up the indoor air quality. There's lots of snake oil tech out there claiming that they're going to clean up all the air in your building, but there's a couple things. We're actually about to release a report later this year that touches on this. Long story short, if we're going to go and electrify loads in buildings, let's make sure we consider the customer experience. So this is reflecting back on 2019, kind of where we started our journey around electrification, working with utilities to ensure that electrification happens in a way that's environmentally, economically, and grid efficient. And what we mean by that from environmental angle is that we actually do improve the GHG's intensity, so that we do actually decarbonize through electrification. Some cases there is rationale for example, if you've got a really efficient boiler system and your grid is not entirely clean, it might make sense to not immediately electrify that load. It might make sense to wait a year or two. The other aspect is optimizing the electric grid to reduce rates. That's what we call grid efficient. So we make sure that whatever electrification we do, it doesn't result in massive uptick in rates to the customer, which this is why there's an overlap. We also want to make sure it's economically efficient for the customer as well as for the utility. So we released a white paper in 2019 on what we consider beneficial electrification. We did a presentation on this with you in 2019. Since then, there's been a couple of developments. This is by no means an exhaustive list of developments. These are just some key things that I think are important in terms of trends in what's happened in the last 2 years. And the first one is really that we've seen a lot of states enact building electrification or electrification mandates, as well as changing the regulations to allow fuel switching. And in this context, a lot of the time it's up to the Public Utility Commission or the regulator to allow fuel switching, which of course isn't necessarily up to the regulator, but it's the regulator that makes that changes the regulation that allows us to be an expensable or a capitalizable expense under their demand side management regulation. So some of the usual culprits that have been able to do this over the last couple of years is California, New York, and Massachusetts. But more recently, and with some building momentum, we've got states like Washington, Illinois, and Minnesota that recently made it possible to basically spend on fuel switching, and of course, Colorado. The other tool, so to speak, is stretch codes. So a lot of municipalities have a lot of, the municipalities can do a lot to move the needle in terms of electrification and decarbonization. So you've got provinces in Canada like BC where a municipality can actually go above and beyond what's required at the provincial level. And likewise in states like Washington, you have cities like Seattle that have established their own commercial energy code, which in this case actually requires heat pumps as a baseline piece of equipment. So there's a lot municipalities are doing and can doing. You've probably read in the news around municipalities that are banning gas. So it's not just a couple of municipalities at this point, it's municipalities across the country. The other trend or barrier that needs to be overcome is this idea of electric ready infrastructure. And the reason I bring this up is if a customer wants to electrify and their furnace or their AC recently broke down, whatever it might be, they're going to want to have that system replaced ASAP. And if their home can't accommodate the additional load that a heat pump requires, they're not going to go with the heat pump. They're going to go with whatever gets their home heating or cooling, whatever it might be, as quickly as possible. So we got to make sure, in coordination with utilities and municipalities, that their homes are ready. And there's a bunch of cool technology out there that allows us to do that in an effective way, so that we're not just installing a bigger panel. In some cases, maybe we're installing circuit splitters, we're installing smart panels, new technology that allows you to regulate and sort of manage the loads that you're seeing on multiple circuits for the home. The other thing that's happening, and that's been ongoing for the last couple of years and continues, is improving the technology. So in one of my next slides, I'll actually talk about cold climate heat pumps as a significant improvement over year over year on the efficiency. Also, a lot of times we call that coefficient of performance, and how these newer heat pumps are capable of heating even in a lot colder temperatures. And then I've got two more developments that are even more recent. So recently, there's a new, I think you guys are calling it bills in the States. So there's a bill that's being considered for switching out heat pumps instead of ACs. So essentially requiring that at any point in time when an AC is being replaced or being installed, a heat pump should be installed in its stead. So I think, this is a simple policy switch that will make a huge difference. So every time we're thinking about installing an air conditioning unit, we in fact just install almost the same piece of equipment with a reversing valve in it, and suddenly we can also heat and cool the home. The last sort of trend that we're seeing that's super critical is that a lot of these electrification programs need to be complemented by demand flexibility programs. So I'm talking about smart thermostats that can enable peak shifting on the grid to accommodate new loads. Talking about battery storage, talking about behavioral type programs. So a lot of activity in this area to make sure that we maintain that grid reliability. So this slide is showing, this is what we pulled together from some ACEEE data. These are all the states in green that are currently, that have a mandate for electricity, electrification. So in these states, there's policies in place and regulations that not only allow, but also encourage fuel switching. Some of the key sectors. So in this slide deck or this presentation, I'm talking entirely about buildings, but there's a lot of electric activity happening in transportation and industrial processes as well. One of the particularly cool ones is school buses. There are a lot of pilots out there right now switching out school buses with electric school buses. They have a fairly regular schedule, routes, and they're prime candidate for switching over to electric. The other cool ones is you probably noticed in your backyard. So this isn't just like industrial, but I think just like landscaping. So any time that you're in the yard or there's commercial landscaping happening, it's not actually on here, but I think that's particularly awesome. Like I never want to use a gas lawnmower again, basically, after having used a nice electric mower. So in terms of key technologies, I already talked a little bit about cold climate heat pumps. This is from some of the work that we recently did. So you can see here, the blue line is the capacity of a traditional air source heat pump, which drops off fairly significantly once you hit 35 degrees Fahrenheit, as opposed to, and the reason that we have a wider band is because it's still a developing technology, and some of these cold climate heat pumps work at a higher capacity than others. But generally speaking, you can see that it doesn't really start dropping off until you hit 15 Fahrenheit. And this is continuously improving. So some of the units that we're aware of right now can still maintain 80% capacity as low as -17 Fahrenheit. The other piece that I think is kind of cool to mention is this new inverter-driven technology that slows down the compressor and refrigerant flow to match this temperature set point in a home. So you've got the gray line here. Traditional systems, they've run flat out 100%, and then you turn it off, on, off, as opposed to having this variable flow system that sort of just constantly is on, but it just modulates depending on the need of the home or the building. What's important here too, from a grid perspective, is that having something that's easily modulated and then having hundreds or thousands of these units connected to the grid is a lot more of a reliable and doesn't cause these peaks on the grid. So that's something that we usually point out when we're talking about why that's important from a grid perspective. I included this slide because I've done this presentation for others. Most of you folks probably don't need to be told that there's two types of heat pumps. But what is particularly interesting to me is that in these central systems, there's an opportunity to talk about not a complete switch out of your furnace or boiler, but you can install the heat pump in addition to or in replacement of your AC. So you have a hybrid system. And the hybrid system is also interesting because if you're a utility and you're trying to keep the rates low, you're trying to not invest too much in beefing up the capacity of your grid to accommodate all the peaks. So you've got all these winter peaks that could arise with heat pumps being installed and peaking at the same time. So if you have a hybrid system, you can coordinate the control of these furnaces that still exist in the home to kind of dampen that effect. And at the same time, with that bill that will require switching out ACs with heat pumps, you, in a lot of cases, can repurpose the central systems with the ducts still installed. That's to say, like, ductless systems and mini splits, really awesome, especially for heating just specific rooms and having multiple zones. So there's benefits to both having both types of systems and coordinating among them. The other thing that I just want to quickly touch on is refrigerants. Currently, kind of standard are the refrigerants that I've highlighted here below. This is the CO2 emissions or CO2 equivalents based off of the type of refrigerant that you're using. So if this refrigerant leaks, then you've got these varying global warming potentials. I should have put what this is, if this is per a certain volume of refrigerant leaks. So I apologize for that. But basically what we're saying here, there's a bunch of replacement refrigerants that have much, much lower global warming potential. And as we scale up and install these heat pumps everywhere, we really need to be thinking about, well, what type of refrigerant are we using? Because some of these are substantially lower in terms of how much CO2 they produce if they're leaked. And of course, we also need to be thinking about, well, how do we prevent leakage in the first place? And that's with good maintenance. So it's kind of a two-pronged solution to a problem. The other electrifiable load is water heating. And this one's particularly cool because if you have thousands of water heaters connected, you can kind of see on the right here, load flexibility, that in a traditional water heater, you just turn it on and off. But if we can control a bunch of these water heaters, we can do that to shift peaks and flatten the peak, flatten the load curve. And at the same time, we can radically increase the efficiency if we're using a heat pump instead of a gas storage-based water heater. So there's a lot of opportunity in the water heating space. Last but not least, I call this the Achilles heel because a lot of folks still really want to cook with gas. It kind of has that warm, cozy feeling, but there's so many options out there right now in electric induction cooking. At a recent eSource event, we had a live demonstration from a chef that, well, the chef was Chris Galarza with For Dining Solutions. He's an expert in induction cooking. So if you want to learn more about induction cooking, I would encourage you to check out what he's doing. But there's no excuse anymore to be not thinking about electric cooking. And then also super important, and I talked with Patricia about this one, is that none of this really is possible if we're not also considering weatherization. And when I mean weatherization, I'm talking about air sealing the building, stopping the cold air and vapor from entering or escaping, as well as improving the insulation in the building. So parts of the envelope that we want to weatherize, include attics, super important, walls, crawl space, foundations, rim joists, literally all parts of the building, but particularly I started with attics because that's usually one of the areas of home where you're losing most of the heat and is often very poorly insulated, especially for older homes. I also talked at the start about electric ready infrastructure. So this is the type of infrastructure we need to have in place so that if a customer wants to electrify and install a heat pump, they have the circuits and the capacity on their panel in place to be able to do that. And we're talking most of these homes are probably going to be post 1990s. And if they are, and they don't have an existing 200 amp panel, then most of the homes that we saw in our study and our work require just a panel upgrade. In some cases, the utilities also need to do a service upgrade, which basically means, depending on if it's a wiring that's underground or not, can be a lot more expensive. So that needs to be taken into account by the utility itself. But you guys aren't utilities, so who cares? I also wanted to share some feedback that we got or results from our electrification survey. So we do a survey with all homeowners sampled from across the US and Canada. not on an annual basis, but we do these regularly. And we found that really there's a couple of key problems, and that's lack of familiarity and awareness among customers for these type of new technologies and what their motivations and purchase behaviors are around them. Key being that there's a low level of awareness and familiarity with these technologies. So you can see here among those that we surveyed that had fossil fuel technology, over half say they're not likely to purchase electric alternatives. So as the familiarity increases, these numbers will shift. But from a starting point in 2021, you can see that even in 2021, there's still a lot of resistance to electrifying. And this is just like some of the characteristics that we asked about. You can see that there's only 2 of them, appliance safety and cleaner indoor air, where customers said that, hey, we think electricity is better. Literally for every single other one, including the environment, folks generally thought they were either the same or gas was better. Reliability, you can see cooking here. That's why I call it the Achilles heel. Literally almost everyone thinks that gas is better, 53% the same, and only 20% thought that electricity was better. And this goes hand in hand here. This is another finding that we saw, like when an appliance or a furnace breaks down, some of the most important things to consider is what brand of the appliance, how much is it going to cost, how easy is it to use, and how fast can we replace it, and how much is it going to cost. So these are some of the characteristics that you'll need to consider when dealing with your customer in terms of what's most important to them. I'm going to skip through this. There's a lot of cool programs happening across the states, but I recognize I'm talking probably more than I should. But there's, I think these slides are going to be shared. So feel free, once you get the slides in hand.
Barend, if you want to just at least do a high level on them, that would be great. Because
okay, I'm going to back up. So here at high level, really, there's a couple cool. This is touching on the momentum that I had shared earlier. There's various cities in California, Washington, New England that are banning gas, or in some cases just encouraging or mandating all new electric construction. So if you're building a new building, it's going to be all electric. There's a bunch of jurisdictions now where heat pumps are the baseline. I mentioned Seattle. So in that case, you're building a new building, it has to at least have a heat pump. Fuel switching policies. So Illinois, Minnesota, they recently had a regulatory shift, which now allows energy efficiency funds to go towards fuel switching. There's also a lot of interest and action in the equity space. So we want to make sure that if we are electrifying, we're not leaving behind low-income households and schools in disadvantaged communities. So there's a lot of funding being carved out to make sure that these programs are accessible to all customers, not just the ones that are driving a Tesla. So the theme that we're seeing, one of the first high-level themes, is that incentives are going up and they're being delivered through midstream. So instead of paying an incentive to the customer, the incentive goes to either the distributor and in some cases upstream to the manufacturer themselves. So this is a really great way for utilities that deliver these incentives to build better relationships with distributors. And then a lot of these programs as well offer higher incentives even if the project to install the heat pump is combined with weatherization. The tech initiative in California is particularly cool because it's a statewide program that includes some other key features that help build a workforce and address the familiarity and awareness gap. So they're doing a lot of campaigns targeting consumers across the state. They're working with and training educators to work with contractors on key technology characteristics of like what does a contractor need to know about a heat pump, how to install it properly to make sure that the customer doesn't end up with a heat pump that's either over or undersized or doesn't operate, doesn't maintain temperature well in the building. So as soon as you have a bunch of customers that are unhappy with their heat pumps, it's not really going to help the whole industry. So we want to make sure that if we're installing heat pumps, we install them properly. There's also the Electric Ready Infrastructure program that SMUD offers. So it offers incentives for new electric panels and circuits so that we can overcome that barrier of installing new electric equipment. And then there's some cool programs across the states. For example, Alabama Power offers interactive cooking classes using electric induction cooktop stoves as part of a community education initiative. And then there's also Palo Alto in California, which is working together with a local nonprofit to do similar workshops and loan out some of these cooktop stoves so that customers can try them before they buy. So this is my last slide, if you haven't fallen asleep yet. And I just wanted to stress that it really is important to start thinking about electric ready infrastructure. So you can't do any of these quick replacements with customers if the infrastructure, aka the panel, the electric panel, the circuits, the utility service aren't ready to accommodate all these new electric appliances. So you really got to make sure that that's done. Secondly, I really recommend and love the idea of installing heat pumps instead of ACs. So if this gets shared about, there's a really great Canary Media article that talks about this. So I encourage you to read into that. Thirdly, this is again more focused around what the utility should do, but the utility, if they're not reaching out with you and they're not trying to build a strong relationship with you as a distributor, manufacturer, or contractor, then they're doing something wrong. So they really need to make sure that they're doing that. Fourthly, got to take advantage of all these heat pump incentives. There's a lot of dollars out there, and we just need to really make sure that they're making use of them. Fifth, we definitely have to include education awareness and marketing materials for heat pump technology, especially with customers that are kind of maybe on the fence, interested, but just need to know more. And then last but not least, don't forget about weatherization. Insulate and air seal those buildings. It'll make the job of the heat pump that much easier, and also help out the grid a little in terms of managing those peaks. This is me. Please email me. I'm happy to talk about electrification anytime.
Great. Thanks, Barend. It's a great overview to remind us how things are moving along in the industry and kind of the expectations. And we can take about 5 minutes if there's any questions. One of the questions please put them in the chat box and we'll read them. So I know Deborah Connie, if you want to jump in, if there's some questions that come up in the chat box. My question, Barend, is I like to go back, my history is working for Owens Corning Insulation, air sealing. So in terms of, how do we talk with insulators and the contractors that are working on the shell, the envelope of the building, and how that actually impacts shifting load? Any comments for a contractor to be thinking about how they're talking about selling to a homeowner? Because I think the star right now is heat pumps, right? We're all talking about heat pumps and that transition where consumers are at. What I've seen is, for example, one of our members said that, last year the only reason they sold, around 20 heat pumps was because they asked the consumers, and the consumers had enough knowledge that they ended up buying heat pumps. So it's happening out there in that the transition, but I think as contractors asking for that sale and getting into that conversation is the important part as a part of that sale. So any comments on the weatherization, insulation, air sealing envelope for those contractors, what their story is as a part of this?
Yeah, thanks. We recently actually had a utility reach out about how they could position weatherization as a way to shift peaks. And weatherizing a building is not going to shift the peak. What it will do is it'll lower the peak. So it basically just brings down your entire load curve because you're just stopping heat from escaping the building. Or in the case of the summer, if you've got a more efficient AC, you're just like reducing the load across the entire load profile. But what you can do is if you design a rate that the utility can offer to the customer, that's a dynamic rate, complement that with behavioral programs, among other demand response type programming, but at the same time make the heat pump interactive with the grid. Then you're able to manage its peaks more effectively. But it will make the job of all the demand flexibility and peak shifting that much easier if you're bringing that whole load curve down, which is why weatherization and air sealing with insulation is super critical. Another thing that was asked was what's more important, air sealing, insulation. Depending on the type of insulation, you're going to naturally be doing some air sealing, but a lot of the programs will actually require blower door testing and targeted air sealing, because it does, like, just insulating a home is not going to by definition air seal it. You're going to need to do both. So yeah. I don't know, those are kind of my high level comments on that question. Hopefully that was helpful and answers part of it.
Well, I think it shows that there's a place for insulating, air sealing the envelope in this story. It's not just the mechanicals again.
Yeah, and the other comment I'd make is that if you're going to install a heat pump before you air seal and do all this insulation work, you're going to end up with a home that has an oversized heat pump. And an oversized heat pump is less efficient than a properly sized, or even I'd argue a slightly undersized heat pump is going to be better off. You're going to be better off with a slightly undersized heat pump than a completely oversized heat pump. So if you do the weatherization work first, you're going to make sure that whatever heat pump equipment that you install is properly sized.
Yep, great point. I think too, we underestimate the reminder that it's all about comfort for your consumer, right? For the homeowner, the comfort and the savings. And the research that I saw when I was at Owens Corning was that consumers, homeowners will pay for comfort before they'll pay for savings. So reminder that the comfort story is, if we're just talking about electrification, that maybe doesn't resonate, but the comfort and then getting the results as well is, I think, part of the story. Are there any, I wonder if there's any comments or questions we need to address before we...
There's a question here around using manual J rather than rough calculations. My understanding is we're using manual J, but I'm also not a contractor in the field. So yeah, I think maybe that's a question that is something that I'd have to get back to you on.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. If there's not anything else, we're going to move on to our next presenter and talk with Mark Schoenheider from Xcel Energy. And part of the reason that I really wanted him to talk today is in attending distributor meetings and contractor meetings on the heat pump HVAC side, as well as we've heard feedback consumers are asking questions like, is there enough electricity to electrify the grid? And you know, a lot of misinformation is out there, and Xcel has put together a presentation to address like what their path is in that area. And so I thought it made a lot of sense today to talk about that, to understand this big picture of building electrification that we're talking about. So thanks, Mark.
Great, thanks for having me. For those of you guys that have seen me before, I'm probably usually on the other side of it, talking about our energy efficiency programs, talking about our beneficial electrification rebates from Xcel. But it really goes hand in hand with the grid. And as Patricia mentioned, my main question that I'm here to talk about is, you know, how will the grid react, and can we electrify everything? The short answer is absolutely we'll do it, right? We'll always have reliable, safe, clean service for everybody. We've been doing it for 100 years. There's no question about the reliability of the grid. The longer answer, and the one that's really more important, actually goes back, and I think Barend did a great job setting up my talk today, in that there's a lot of different factors, right? There's the environmental side of it, there's the cost side of it, both in initial cost for customers as well as the cost to build that grid. And I think that's really where the nuance comes in, and where the choices that customers make, and frankly, the choices that you guys in the audience today, that you help customers make, is what will be critical in moving forward in a sustainable way. I was happy to see in Barend's presentation that, you know, the theme that not all electrification is necessarily beneficial. I strongly agree with that. There are customer situations that are either better or worse for it. There are climates that are better or worse for it. There are utility rates and bills and all sorts of different things that have to factor into it. So putting all that aside, I am going to focus on the topic of sort of what does the grid side look like, and but at the same time, feel free to throw questions in there sort of related to any of it. I think you guys are probably familiar with Ann Kirkpatrick, who is our trade relations manager, and she is definitely more of an expert on the nuts and bolts details of the programs, but I will do my best to answer any of those as they come up. So okay, so with that, we're gonna go super high level, right? When we talk about planning from a utility perspective, we kind of break it into the generation and transmission side of it, which is on the left of the screen there in the circle, and then the distribution planning. And you know, at a very high level, our generation system is evolving. We used to be very carbon focused, very dispatchable, meaning we can turn a plant on or off when we need to. We can ramp up the output at any given time. Last year in Colorado, we were a little over 50% renewable, meaning more than half of the energy that we produced and delivered to customers was from renewable sources, primarily wind. There's a little less solar, then a little bit of hydro in there. And the hydro is more of a balancing resource for us, where we literally have two reservoirs, a high one and a low one up at Cabin Creek. And when we need energy on the grid, water flows down from the high one to the low one through turbines, generates electricity. And when we have excess wind on the grid or excess renewables, we actually pump that same water back up. And so it's kind of a really big low cost battery. That's the generation side. I'm going to focus a little more on the distribution side today. And when we talk about distribution, we talk about everything sort of from those substations on down. So it's the feeders, which can be above ground, they can be underground, and they're kind of represented over there as serving 1,500 to 8,000 customers. Those are typically at about 13.2 thousand volts. So definitely not something a customer's going to tap into, but they're kind of the backbone of the local system. Then we have the taps, which you'll have a transformer getting it down to more of a customer voltage, and then even the service lines into the house. And when we think about that system, like I said, we've been doing this for 100 years. It's the majority of the grid is out there already. And when we start to think about the planning process, I'll show this on the next slide, but it's really a circular, continuously evolving process. And the steps that are shown here, are sequential, but they're sequential sort of in that they always happen and they're happening. We're at sort of a different step of the process on every little part of the grid almost daily. It's a lot of them are, we've built enough capacity that we don't have to look at, for a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years. But there are parts of the system that we look at constantly. And that really, if you read through these, it's basically figure out what and when that system peak is currently, figure out what our load forecast looks like, either from growth, whether we have new developments going in there, or we have changes to the existing customers. And those changes, the biggest two that we've seen recently are both from electrification. One is from electric vehicles, and the other is from electrifying space and to a lesser degree, water heating. Well, I'll get into a little more detail on both of those later. But so once we basically know where we're at, we look at what that forecast is, we go down to sort of the risk analysis and say, okay, how's the system going to do with this? And the key here is we don't just look at the system under perfect conditions. We look at it under either N-1, N-2 redundancy or conditions. And that nomenclature really means what happens. N-1 is what happens if one critical piece in that system, goes out of service. And it can go out of service for many different reasons. It could be for sort of routine maintenance, which if we're planning it, we will do it at a time that's not at the peak. But it could go out for, literally squirrels jump a fence and get fried in a transformer, and the system that piece of equipment goes down. It could be wildfires. It could be all sorts of different things. When we look at that system risk, then we figure out, okay, what do we do when that happens? And so there are mitigation plans in place for, various levels of contingencies at various points in the system. And if we go through that mitigation evaluation and the answers don't look good, we start to look at capital projects and, okay, what do we need to do to reinforce that particular part of the grid? We may evaluate it and say the amount of capital it takes to reduce the risk to, by some level is either really high or it's not, and it's an acceptable level, and that will help us determine which projects to undertake. The underlying concept on all of this, though, as Barend talked about, is at the end of the day, customers are going to pay these costs, right? And so we are charged with providing a safe, reliable, low-cost grid and energy to our customers. And so that's part of the analysis. Then at the end of the day, economics have to factor into it. And so that's part of that capital project development and evaluation. And let's say we do execute a project, we kind of go right back to the beginning of the circle. And you can kind of see, this whole circle that we just talked about. These are effectively the same thing on the distribution system. The gray box over there references back to, we have a somewhat similar process on the generation transmission. And that one's a little more bigger scale and a little more regulatory driven. There's just frankly less points on the generation and transmission side than there on the distribution side. So, okay, I'm going to shift now from sort of the super high level view and move over to specifically those two, the two topics we talked about, which were beneficial electrification, both for building electrification and for transportation. When we think about building electrification, first and foremost, I don't want us to think about it in the context of it's an all or nothing decision, because it really isn't. There are some customers that, for whatever reason, absolutely want to electrify everything in their house, in their existing house. But the vast majority are not, that's not really the way they think, right? And one of the overriding sort of philosophies that I think if we're all going to be successful in the decarbonization effort that we're undertaking is that we have to do the things that make sense. And an example that, again, going back to Barend's presentation, he talked about when a customer's air conditioner fails, replace it with a heat pump. And you know, I'm gonna sort of dig into that one a little bit and assume he's talking about a typical split system. There's a very low incremental cost. There's very little difference from the outside of the unit looking at it, right? A customer is not going to see the difference. They're going to be comfortable, familiar with a split system heat pump. And also, if you can really avoid many of the whether it's panel upgrades or grid impacts. If you think about it, let's say you had a 3-ton air conditioner and you replace it with a 3-ton heat pump. Typically, it's going to be a little more efficient than the air conditioner you're replacing. So the peak draw for that customer is lower. And if you do that in a dual fuel system where you keep the existing gas furnace, there's no additional load on the grid. There's very little change from the customer's perspective, and you can reduce or eliminate, the majority of their natural gas consumption and the associated carbon. So those are, for the vast majority of customers, that is going to be a very low incremental cost, a cost which, for example, Xcel's rebates cover the vast majority of, and it will be very little change in what they're used to. It will reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It'll reduce their natural gas consumption. It'll give them flexibility to kind of choose between fuels, and it'll have virtually no impact on the required demand for that customer. Now, is that the right answer for everybody? No, but is it an option that we definitely want to make customers aware of and realistically recommend for the vast majority of customers? Yeah, I believe so. And when we think about that, that eliminates a lot of these problems, whether it's needing to upgrade that grid edge. So the taps, the laterals, the service drops, all of that stuff. If we don't go with, or if a customer wants to go a little farther than that and in a higher level electrification, there are definitely things we need to consider. Generally speaking, and these are not exact numbers, but the amount of the cooling load on a home is about half the heating load on a home in the Denver and the metro area. So let's say you had that, you had a 3-ton air conditioner, let's say it's 36,000 BTUs. Your heating load, your peak heating load on a design day on that same home is probably 72,000 BTUs, right? Meeting that with all electric, so either a heat pump or a electric resistance is going to you're going to need more electricity coming in. If you had, the same efficiency on the peak summer day as you do on the peak winter day, you could get by with, with a 6-ton unit, but you don't, right? Air source heat pumps, by definition, their efficiency gets worse as it gets colder. And there are quite a few good cold climate heat pumps now that still produce heat, may be able to keep up with the load down at 0 and 10 and 15. And, our utility design day for winter is 25 degrees below 0. So we build out infrastructure so that we're able to serve customers at 25 below 0. There aren't, air source heat pumps that have a meaningfully better coefficient of performance, better than 1, down at that temperature. So effectively, you're at electric resistance down there. And now the electric load for that customer, the peak load, which they may use, 2 hours every 5 or 10 years, is very high. But they still need to have an electric service. Their panel needs to be able to meet that unless they have a different backup source. So If we fully electrify, we're going to have costs basically at that service line. If a transformer is as shown on the picture here, serves anywhere from 4 to 10 customers, and if you have one fully electrify their heat, it probably doesn't need an upgrade on the transformer. If you have 2, 3, 4, or 5 maybe on the same transformer, it will. So there will be sort of upgrades required kind of further up the distribution path, and we'll do it, right? That's part of Xcel, part of being a regulated utility, is we will provide service for customers. That's so. The quick question, the quick answer back at the beginning was, do we have the capacity, and will we build it, and can we electrify space heating? Absolutely. And again, getting back to the more nuanced answer is, there are going to be more cost effective and smarter ways to do it than fully electrifying everybody in every home. So I think I'm going to jump to electric vehicles, and I know that isn't quite as much of a focus for this team, but it is relevant. And I wanted to bring it up because the electric vehicle load for electric is a little different than building heat. Building heat, everybody needs building heat at the same time. When it's 0, everybody's heat is running, right? An electric vehicle, on the other hand, you can change when you charge it, right? Not everybody needs to charge at the same time. And so the loads from a typical EV, if you have a level 2 charger, can be pretty high. However, there's a lot of flexibility on when those are charged. That being said, if we don't get customers to enroll in managed charging programs, we could have some of those same issues where if you have 3, 4, 5, 10 EVs that are clustered together on a distribution transformer, we'll need to upgrade that transformer. Electric vehicles do what we've seen, and I think it's backed up by quite a bit of research and frankly common sense. They cluster a lot more in neighborhoods than heat pumps will, right? Than electrifying space heating or water heating. If Fred down the block gets a Tesla, George over here is like, oh, I need a shiny new Tesla, right? It turns out EVs are a lot sexier than heat pumps are. And so there's a lot more of that kind of keeping up with the Joneses and getting multiple EVs on the same street, versus we have not seen that yet with electrification of either space or water heating. So, okay, I'm going to jump forward, and a little bit about what are we doing, right? I said we've been operating an electric grid in Colorado for over 100 years. That doesn't mean to say we know everything, right? Times are changing, both EVs and heat pumps. And so we are engaged in quite a few study and research projects, both on the EV side, and given the focus of this audience, I'm going to move ahead and go over to our heat pump study efforts, where I'm going to talk about a couple. One is with NREL. If you're not familiar, they're just over here in the sort of golden-ish area. And as a utility, we had a couple questions, specifically around cold climate heat pumps. One of it was a technology sort of a question, because not only does the performance of heat pumps change with outdoor ambient temperature, but it also changes with altitude, right? So you have a lower air density up at elevation, right? Just like you would derate a furnace because there's less sort of oxygen in the air that's available up here. We know that at heat pump operation with the heat exchangers changes at altitude. We don't know exactly how it changes, and frankly, we're not sure that manufacturers have fully explored it either. And so one of our research projects we wanted to understand was, how do these cold climate heat pumps that are on the market perform at elevation? And then the other piece of it that we didn't feel was, well, we wanted more information. One was, how do customers actually respond to heat pumps? What does the customer experience look like with cold climate heat pumps? And so we're working with NREL to not only do laboratory testing in their ESIF, their Energy Systems Integration Facility. They have a great lab up in Golden, and we're able to replicate very cold conditions in that lab and do analytical testing on heat pumps in the cold at our elevation. But we're also targeting 40 heat pump systems that'll be both in the Front Range as well as in the mountains, because it's the majority of our customers may be in the Front Range, but we have higher heat loads and potentially some really good and interesting opportunities up in the mountains, but definitely different climate up there, right? Our design temperature up there is even lower than it is down here, and the elevation's even higher. So that kicked off at the end of last year. We're doing the lab testing now, and we anticipate having the field tests for in customers' homes this winter. So we should get quite a bit of information there, and we anticipate this will be sort of a rolling research project, because frankly, we're not going to learn everything in one winter. As new technology comes out, as new ways to install and operate and kind of new ways to interact with the customer come out, we feel we're going to need to kind of keep doing that similar level of research and testing over the next couple of years. The next one that I'll talk about is CEE. This is the Minnesota CE, not the national CE. And they have sort of compiled lots and lots of information, as well as starting to do some primary research on heat pumps and kind of understanding, a little more of what the real life annual sort of cost to operate, cost to own, and performance looks like. And so we've partnered with them to participate in that and learn a little more. The third one is a little further out. We're partnered with the Department of Energy on their cold climate heat pump challenge. And this is really on the actual technology side, right? This isn't the first two studies that we're working on are really units that are out there available to be installed today. This third one is much further out, trying to build and develop better heat pumps, better cold climate, specifically heat pumps for the future. If right, I talked about earlier, if we're down at electric resistance heating or a COP of 1 down near our design day, that would be a huge build out of the electric grid for customers that are going to convert. And we want to understand if there's a better option, and if we can improve that efficiency in very cold temperatures moving forward, so that potentially we can get away from, or give customers more choices about what they do on really cold days. Right now, we're strong advocates of keeping your natural gas furnace and using it when it's really cold out, but we do want to offer options for customers that don't want to do that. So I think I am very close to the end, and I really have one takeaway, and that's communication is key. We've been planning for 100 years. We're adjusting our planning, but we don't have all the answers, right? And nobody has all the answers. And anybody that tells you they have all the answers is lying to you, or they're well. So we need to solve the problem and to kind of move us forward in a way that is environmentally sustainable, that is low cost for customers to put in equipment, and for low cost customers to kind of pay their bills moving forward. We're going to need communication and cooperation to solve this. And you guys, as the sort of front line of out there in front of customers, speccing systems, installing systems, hearing from customers, hopefully not getting callbacks from customers because the system isn't working as they expected, but all of that is needed, and we have to all sort of understand and work together so that we share that knowledge and move forward with a path that works better. If I think back to another scenario that's similar, I go back to, it's probably simpler, but it's similar. When we went from incandescence and the first CFLs came out, there were some good CFLs. There were a lot of really bad compact fluorescent lamps, and customers got a horrible taste in their mouth, and they wouldn't adopt them, right? And LEDs came out, and they were a much better technology. but they were kind of solving the same problem. And I think we as an industry need to make sure that the experience that the customers have with heat pumps is positive. And I think it can be, right? The technology's there if applied correctly for the right customer in the right location at the right time. It can be, it can be a very successful implementation, but there are definitely pitfalls. And if we don't do it right, we don't communicate, we push, product out there either in the wrong application or the wrong product or for the wrong customer, we're not going to be successful. So I think we have to keep the discussion going, and that's really critical in, not only for your guys' kind of business, but for us as a utility and really for all customers. So with that, I think we can open up to questions.
Thanks, Mark. Super helpful. I think a lot of the questions that we have in our industry, I think even just addressing those and understanding your perspective on how those pieces fit together is super helpful. I'm looking at the chat box here.
Yeah, wow, it blew up.
There's been a lot of discussion.
That's excellent.
I'm wondering if I should start. I don't know if Deb or Connie, if you've been watching and if there's first questions we should be asking. Let me see here.
It looks like quite a few were electric induction cooking, which I don't know if those were for me or Barend. I have some insight there, but not a ton.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and we do have one comment here about HVAC technician skill and training is the opportunity. One comment.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I am probably the least knowledgeable here about, you guys work with technicians every day. We have seen a huge need for, competent, skilled, trained technicians. And we've also seen an opportunity for those technicians to come from some communities and some places that they haven't historically come from. We're fortunate enough in Minnesota to through our DSM programs to be able to put some training dollars towards disproportionately impacted communities and to get really some non-traditional people started down that path, which is awesome. That alone is not going to do it. I think there is a huge need for trained technicians. One of the things I didn't really talk about, and I'll get into it's sort of more on the program side, is we've been running air conditioner programs for since 2009 in Colorado and probably for 20 years in Minnesota. The most impactful measures we have are for quality installation. We've done countless metering and evaluations, and take the best unit, and if you don't do a good job installing it, you're leaving a ton of savings and you're adding a lot of cost for the customer. And so I think for me, that's a super illustrative example of why we need quality installation and good trained technicians. And I think, I know there's a labor shortage everywhere. I assume you guys are seeing it on technicians as well, because it's not something you can just go and do, right? You need training, you need experience.
There was one other question also. Can you explain cooling versus heating sizing?
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know if it'll take too long. If you could do that quick, Mark.
I can do it super quick, right? I in a past life, I was an engineer, super high level, right? The amount of heat you need to maintain a space is related to how much heat it's losing, right? And there's air sealing, but if we just think about insulation for a second, the amount of heat transfer is UA delta T, right? And the U is the thermal conductivity. So the more insulation you put in, the lower, the smaller that goes. So that can reduce the amount of heat you need. A is the surface areas, right? So the surface area of your walls, your attic, whatnot. And then delta T is the difference between the outside temperature and the inside temperature. Most people in, let's just say 70 degrees is what they want inside, right? I know it's a little higher in summer and a little lower in winter maybe, but if it's, let's call it 70 for a second. In summer, if it's 70 degrees inside and 100 degrees outside, you have 30 degrees of temperature difference driving that heat exchange, right? And there's solar loads, there's infiltration. I'm just ignoring all that for a second. That 30 degrees is what's driving your heating load. In the winter, if you have that same 70 degrees inside and it's 0 degrees outside, you have 70 degrees driving that heat loss. And so by definition, for the conductive heat loss, you have more than 2 times the load. And so if you have a heat source that, you know, can give you, let's say 30,000 BTUs in summer, a cooling source, and that's enough to keep that delta T right, you're going to need double that in the winter. It's basically a function of our climate, right? And if you go to, you know, Arizona or even like the Pacific Northwest, where they don't get the extreme cold, those delta T's are much more similar between summer and winter. And so, you know, a unit that's sized for cooling may also be able to provide the whole heating load.
Got it. Great. And we are going to have to move forward on time. Great discussion, you guys both. I think there's a nice frame up here to understand what's going on in our industry and where we all fit into that. So super appreciate it. And I'm going to move on to our next speakers, and we're going to talk about the next piece. There's so many different impacts that are happening in our marketplace at the same time. So we're looking at the electrification movement with the utilities and how cities are addressing this and how codes are happening. And it's a cascade of all these different things. And then the next piece that we will look at, because the Eebc, our membership, we participate in the legislative work that takes place, and then also regulatory affairs, which Mark has been talking about as well, which we look at the nuts and bolts down on the front lines. What are the rebates for our different industries? And we've been looking at how, you know, those are impacted and interconnected. So next, I believe Howard Geller, who is consulting with the Eebc, we were going to take a look at some of the key legislation that is passed that's also influencing what we've been talking about today. And then we'll talk with Justin Brant from SWEEP on the strategic issues, which is the 5-year plans that are made by Xcel that affect our business going forward for the next 5 years, and then also the specific rebate plan called demand side management. So with that, Howard, there you are. We also have a
Hi,
PowerPoint.
everyone.
I don't know if you want to run the PowerPoint or we can.
Why don't you do it? You have it there.
Okay, just a second. There we go.
Thank you.
There you go.
So, hi, everyone. Good morning. Good to be with you again. We now have ended the legislative session in mid-May and have legislation that's been signed into law by Governor Polis. I recall talking to the EEBC in the past about this first bill that's listed here, House Bill 1362, a bill pertaining to updating energy codes. And I'm happy to report, in case you haven't heard, that the bill did pass and was signed into law. It was quite a struggle. There was a lot of interest in the bill, a lot of feedback on early drafts of the bill, feedback on later drafts of the bill. There was quite a bit of opposition from local governments, from home builders, from contractor groups. We managed to negotiate some agreements and amendments to the bill during the process and overcome that opposition, got those organizations to either be neutral or supportive of the bill. And at the end of the day, and the very last day of the legislative session, the last step was taken to pass the bill. And I don't know, it was iteration 37 or something like that. It's a bill that directs local governments, cities and counties with building codes to upgrade their energy codes over the roughly next decade. At the time they're updating any building code after next July 1, 2023, they're required to adopt the 2021 IECC along with EV ready, PV ready, and electric ready provisions within their energy code. This applies to all new construction, residential and commercial, and anytime a major rehab project takes place where a building permit is required. The EV ready, PV ready, and electric ready provisions, there'll be model code language put out over the next year, within a year, by an energy codes board. The legislation creates an energy codes board chaired by CO and DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, co-chair it. They make the appointments to the board. The legislation lists the different constituencies that must be represented on the board. And I think by October, the appointments need to be made. There are slots for a PE, for an architect, for a building energy code expert, a building operations professional, and also electrical, plumbing, or mechanical contractor slots. So those of you that are interested in energy codes, that come from those areas, have those professional credentials, might consider applying for the codes board. The Colorado Energy Office is soliciting applications, and I think that I or Patricia can follow up with information about the solicitation and how to apply. But that's an important aspect of the bill, this Energy Codes Board. The legislation defines a lot of parameters that must go into the model code language. So it's not just a totally open book. A lot of it is kind of hardwired as to what needs to be included in that model code language. But still, the board will establish it. There's also going to be an executive committee of the board that's defined in the legislation to take action where in case there isn't sufficient support for particular provisions. And then there's a second phase to the bill, which is very important, that after July 1, 2026, when any local government is updating any building code, they must adopt a low energy and carbon code. And again, the legislation sets out a lot of the parameters and characteristics that need to be met in that code. But once again, this Energy Code Board will be putting out model low energy and carbon code language for local governments to use. Local governments don't need to adopt the model language exactly word for word. They can adopt modified language as long as the performance of what they adopt is equal to or better than the model code. And local governments can go sooner than the deadlines included in the bill. So this is going to lead, if it works as it's designed, which I think it will, this will lead to much more stringent energy codes being put in place, adopted and enforced by the vast majority of local governments where new construction is taking place in the state over the next decade. I wanted to mention one other piece of legislation that passed, talking a lot about heat pumps here this morning. Senate Bill 051 was adopted, and it includes some state-provided incentives, a 10% tax credit on the equipment cost only, not the full cost, but on the equipment cost for heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, any electrical panel upgrade work that's needed, and associated equipment for the adoption of, associated with the adoption of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. It's over the next 2 years, but potentially could get extended in the future once these incentives start. There's, good possibilities to extend them, potentially modify them in the future, but that will require action by the legislature. And then the last bullet there, the purchaser may assign this tax credit to the contractor, meaning the contractor can provide a discount at the time of purchase rather than the purchaser having to wait to get the incentive when they next file their state income tax. Colorado has the same policy in place for electric vehicles, where the state tax credit can be assigned to the dealer and provided at the time of vehicle purchase. Please take note of this, spread the word, include it in your marketing and promotion for those of you that are in the business of marketing, promoting, selling, and installing heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. The last topic I wanted to cover here is an update on the benchmarking and building performance standards, commercial building performance standards legislation. This was the legislation that was adopted last year, and there's a advisory committee that was set up that's been meeting monthly to put out the specific requirements around the performance standards. And it's a task force. And the task force has put out a draft set of recommendations that are out for public comment. And those of you that are interested in this topic should take a look at those proposed standards, and comment period is open. The approach taken is to establish targets on energy use intensity, EUI, by building type, which is following the approach that Denver's been taking. Denver's kind of ahead of the state here in establishing performance standards for commercial buildings. First bullet notes that this only applies to buildings over 50,000 square feet. The second bullet at the bottom covers one alternative path to compliance, which is an electrification path. So electrification of 80% or more of heating and hot water loads is one way for a building to comply if they prefer that to the EUI approach. And there's some credits for partial electrification, credits for on-site or off-site renewables, proposal on the performance standards. You can contact Crystal Egelkamp from CO, or Christine Brinker. And the link there to a survey regarding the proposal is provided, and the comment period is open through July 6th. So there's only a few more weeks. For those of you that are interested, don't delay in taking a look at it and commenting.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Howard. And just as a reminder, to be involved, in the EEBC, you get involved and give input into legislation and rebates and, these pieces that Howard was talking about. So, the way we ensure that our businesses are able to be successful is making sure that we're giving feedback so that it fits our businesses to deliver in the field. So feedback and that survey is very helpful. All the PowerPoints today will be loaded onto the EEBC website and under the quarterly membership meetings. So you can go in and open up this PowerPoint, pick up the links from it and send your survey in. Anything else, Howard?
I just want to thank you, Patricia, and thank EEBC for your support and help with the legislation, particularly the Building Energy Codes Bill, House Bill 1362, your letters and action at key hearings was very helpful, and just wanted to mention that while the meeting was underway, and thank the EEBC for the valuable support it provided.
No, thanks, Howard, and really thank you to the members, because your company's signing up on support letters and testifying, bringing that business voice from the front lines makes a huge difference on the impact on what goes through. So super appreciate it. Thanks, Howard.
I apologize for that hearing, that key hearing in the House that ended at about, 1 a.m. in the morning. But that was outside my control. I was in the hearing room until the very end, but I know a lot of people had to drop off the link.
Yeah, well, we know our legislators are doing their work if they're staying up till 1 in the morning to get stuff
Yeah,
done.
the last week or two, they're working almost around the clock.
That's funny. So awesome. All right. So next, Justin Brant from SWEEP. We're going to have him give an overview of what's upcoming for our members. So we're looking at the filings for strategic issues from Xcel Energy, as well as the 2023 DSM plan, July 1st as well, which means that's where our members, we all get into action to give input and feedback, and take it away.
Thanks, Patricia. Good morning, everyone. So provide a brief update of some goings on at the Public Utility Commission and some upcoming proceedings we're expecting to see filed both on July 1st of this year. I've talked about these before, so it shouldn't be anything new. I'll try to provide a little more detail on sort of the role EEBC could play, but also happy to answer any questions. So first, the Xcel strategic issues filing will be filed on July 1st. So this is a proceeding that happens once every 5 years or so at the commission, where the commission will be setting sort of the budgets and energy savings goals for electric energy efficiency, gas energy efficiency, and for the first time, beneficial electrification for the years 2024 through 2028. So for a 5-year period. I think those are the years. It might be 2029. But this is an important proceeding. It really sets the the overall budgets, how we're measuring success in energy efficiency programs, how we're determining, the cost effectiveness of programs, and this is the opportunity to make changes to cost effectiveness, as well as sort of how the company is compensated for good performance. So all of those policy decisions, I think, really filter down to the programs on how they're delivered and what opportunities there are. So, I think the big questions that we're expecting to see this year, other than, just what are the overall budget levels, is, for the first time, we're setting beneficial electrification goals under the new legislation. So there's, I think, a lot of questions about what those look like. I know Xcel has indicated that previously that they're sort of thinking of, potentially there's one gas savings goal that would include beneficial electrification as well as energy efficiency. There's certainly other ways to look at this in terms of, the number of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters or induction cooktops, the units installed. Could look at it sort of in fuel savings, in a, BTU saved across fuels. So I think, it's a new one for the state, and there's a, big question of what that looks like. In addition, on the electric side, I think there's also questions about, in the past, savings targets have been just, kilowatt hours saved, and there's no consideration of the timing of those savings or the value those savings are providing. So I think there's likely to be discussions about, is it time to think about modifying those types of goals? Should we be moving more to metrics around carbon reduction or something else that would capture the timing and not just treating all sort of kilowatt hour savings the same, no matter, the time they're happening or the value they're providing. I guess similarly, I think there's been discussions around, should there also be goals for demand response savings? We've never really had those types of metrics in the state, but there's a lot of interest in demand response and grid flexibility as we move towards variable renewables and more and more on the grid. So in addition, do we need to be sort of providing goals for the company around those types of metrics around demand response, which we've never had before. In addition, I just think some of the questions of, cost effectiveness, income qualified programs will also be up in that proceeding. I think there are issues around, should there be more dollars devoted towards pilots or new opportunities for program delivery in that proceeding, as we think broadly about budgets. The company has always piloted new technologies, but I guess there's never, a lot of states sort of have a bucket of money that's devoted towards pilots or new programs. And we've been moving that way in some other proceedings with Xcel. So in their transportation electrification plan, as well as their distribution system plan, there are sort of, buckets of money to try new things, and a process in which to get sort of new ideas and delivery models into those programs. In addition, I think, as I said before, we're expecting to see an on-bill financing proposal from the company in strategic issues focused on residential customers. So that's one that will likely be interesting to the folks on this call, as well as just discussions about how, the company's performance incentive, how the company sort of earns profit on energy efficiency. And for me, that's really tied back to the metrics I talked about earlier, sort of, what are we trying to achieve with these programs, and how are we incentivizing the company to meet those? So that's the strategic issues filing. In addition to that, on July 1st, we're expecting to see Xcel's 2023 energy efficiency plan, as well as its first beneficial electrification plan. Again, this is a one-year plan. Xcel usually files these plans in a 2-year cycle, but because the last strategic issues set targets for this 5-year period, we sort of have this one extra year hanging out there. So this will be a plan for only 2023. And then once the strategic issues filing wraps up, we expect a year later to see another sort of specific plan, focused on the targets that were established in strategic issues for 24 and 25. So the 2023 plan, these energy efficiency plans are sort of where the nitty gritty of, what are our incentive levels? How are our programs delivered? That's where those things get worked out. So, I think we're expecting, because it's a one-year plan, it's probably going to look pretty similar to the current energy efficiency plan. But I guess the big difference from our perspective is that this will also include the first beneficial electrification plan. So Xcel has some beneficial electrification measures, as you all know, around fuel switching for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters as part of its current energy efficiency plan, but it's required starting next year to be implementing, more specific beneficial electrification programs. So I think we're expecting to see a little more, hopefully, on that side in terms of beefing those programs up from where they are. But I think these filings are often great opportunities for EEBC to, you guys are the boots on the ground in terms of understanding, what types of incentives and are there ways to modify programs to really drive customer adoption. And that's, so those, nitty gritty energy efficiency plans are often where I know EEBC provides a lot of value in the proceedings before the PUC. And I guess I'll just touch on one more small piece, which I think I've also mentioned before. We've got a little more detail. So in the last year, we've been working a lot with Tri-State. We've the generation and transmission wholesale that serves a lot of the small munis and co-ops around Colorado in our region. They've agreed to establish energy efficiency targets for the first time, and they're sort of working out their plan on how they're going to meet these sort of increased targets than what they've been adopting. So we've been working with them. We're expecting sort of to see their proposal on like new programs, new incentives. So essentially their DSM plan proposal in mid-August, and it'll have some opportunities to comment on that. So I guess if anyone's interested in being part of that process, we could really use the voice of business, I think, as we think about, how can wholesale cooperative with a lot of members with really dispersed territories, offer programs that are effective sort of across their whole footprint. So I'd love to pick the brains of folks on this call, and if you'd like to be part of the process, or I'd be happy just to talk to you so that we can try to bring your voices into those conversations. That would be helpful. As I said, it's sort of mid-August. We're expecting to see their sort of final proposals, but there's opportunities to make comments before that over the summer to try to shape that filing. And then they have to make a sort of informational filing with the Public Utility Commission in September. So I think I'll leave it there and see if there are any questions.
Great. One other question too. Also, as a part of the PUC, is Black Hills Energy also is required to create their DSM plan? Can you have any details on that as well?
Yeah, so I guess they're beneficial electrification. So they just had a DSM plan approved for Black Hills. Wasn't a great result. Their targets and budgets went down. But the commission, their first beneficial electrification plan is due by July 1st. I honestly can say I've heard absolutely nothing from them. So we're expecting to see something because it has to be filed. And I do need to reach out to them to try to understand what's forthcoming. But they've been pretty silent. I think they've been focused on the litigation of this past DSM plan, which just wrapped up last Wednesday. The commission finally ruled on some final pieces. Tied to that, there was some interest on the commissioners on sort of a strategic issues type approach for Black Hills, which they haven't had, similar to Xcel. The place where that landed is Black Hills is required to work with stakeholders over the next year to see if we can come to agreement around sort of those policy issues that would be determined in strategic issues, and let the commission know by May of 2023, have we reached agreement, or do we need a litigated filing on those issues in front of the commission? So I guess over the next year, we'll be having those same policy discussions with Black Hills that I talked about in the in the Xcel strategic issues filing to see if something like that is necessary.
Okay, great. Couple quick comments and something I'm curious about too. Charlie Buck asked, how much room do we think there is statutorily to move away from gigawatts as a primary metric or goal?
Yeah,
So
that's a good question.
question.
You know, the minimum saving standards in statute are, I'd say, not particularly applicable. I mean, there are minimum saving standards where Xcel has been well above them if they haven't already met their 2025 standards, which are cumulative. So, you know, I think we're going to need to ensure that we're still meeting those. But given that they're so, you know, they're not what's been driving performance in the state, the EERS. So I think there is a lot of opportunity from a policy level to move in another direction if that's what the PUC chooses.
Okay. I don't know if there's any other questions. I do think the next piece that I was going to talk about is how our members get involved, right? So everything that you just talked about, Justin, is helpful to frame up what's coming for us. And so what I was going to talk about is the couple ways for our members to give feedback like you're asking for in the process. So I have a little PowerPoint that I can throw up and just show kind of how our intervening team looks and talk about that real quick. If there's any other questions, I think there is one here from Eric Wilson. Let's see. Have you seen any movement in Colorado related to energy efficiency as a service, AAK MEETS, for commercial buildings?
I guess at a policy level, no. You know, that might be a better question for Mark from Xcel, honestly, if he's still on the phone. You know, I feel like I've heard that they're looking at it. I know there are certain providers looking at it sort of outside of the PUC framework.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
you know, it hasn't been a big, at least at a policy level, there hasn't been a big focus on it.
Got it. Great. That was super helpful. Any other comments before we go other than get involved?
Yeah, so yeah, other than that, get involved and give Patricia what she wants. But yeah, you know, I think the voice of EEBC has always been helpful and powerful at the Public Utility Commission. And, you know, also for those of us who are sort of there every day advocating it, it's great to get your perspective on what works and what doesn't, so that we can also bring that into the conversation. So I think, you know, I'm happy to engage with your policy committee sort of over the summer, just, you know, if there are proceedings where you're not involved, thinking about how we can get sort of still keep EEBC's voice into those conversations.
Absolutely. Great. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So you've heard about the issues and the that are upcoming that are going to be discussed at Xcel. And also we have multiple action committees and our policy action committee that we get together as a group and you know, work through the different pieces that each one of your industries have and how you're being affected by all this decision and rulemaking that takes place on a regular basis every year. And the slide that I've put up here is the team that EEBC has to help gather your input, your influence, so that we can advocate for what our members are looking for to drive your business. And with all these changes that are happening. So really quick, I have up here to inform, influence, and advocate for beneficial electrification, demand response, gas, electric policymaking, and Xcel Energy's dockets, but also we do work with other utilities as well. And Justin talked about some of what's happening with Tri-State, and we work with PRPA, which is, you know, Fort Collins, Longmont, the utilities up north, and throughout the state. So it's really important for members to bring your voices forward and to dive into the actual rebates and what's working, what kind of market development do you need to deliver them in the field. The big piece that we've all been talking about and dealing with is workforce, and your struggle to get the workforce you need to deliver in the field, and the trainings and those types of things. So we want to make sure that you're resourced properly and also understand what's coming so that you can have an influence on shaping what the policies that are being created happen this year. So the big lift here is July 1st through the end of the year. Howard Geller, who spoke earlier, the past executive director of SWEEP, he is our demand side management, which is just another word for rebate incentive program at Xcel, our expert and technical advisor. And he's going to be working closely with our action groups and on the front lines, and that synergy of getting the business data and combining that and working with the other stakeholders that are going to be what we call intervening, which is the legal docket that we all go through with the Public Utilities Commission and Xcel Energy. So the second part on my slide here are field experts. That's you guys who inform the policy arguments. And right now we have 2 heat pump action groups. They're HVAC heat pump manufacturers and distributors and stakeholders in one group, and the dealer contractors in another group. We have our commercial lighting team that has been meeting on a regular basis as well. And then we'd like to spin up a building envelope insulation air sealing group, because I think the building envelope weatherization is being elevated as a part of the beneficial electrification of buildings. And how do we make sure that the auditors and those companies that you guys are positioning for the changes that are coming as well. And so then we have been requested by some of the funders to have an Eebc field testimony witness in the process, in that we would have a contractor who would speak to their experience in the field, but not be a, I don't know if you want to say an official or formal witness testifying and going through where you're cross examined. That we are trying to make that a little bit different. And of course, then we also have Dietz and Davis, who to participate in the PUC process for the utilities requires a legal counsel in Colorado, which is expensive, and it includes developing testimony and processing all the administrative pieces legally. So that's the work that the Eebc does on behalf of our members, and that's what we are starting on July 1st. Our action groups have already been meeting and digging into the rebates and what they need to deliver in the field. So this is my call to action to get involved, because this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where rebates get made. This is a lot of change. If we're talking about beneficial electrification rebates, what are those going to look like? You want to have input into those. So that is our team. And with that, we typically don't talk about fundraising on our quarterly membership meetings, but because of the budget for us to participate on behalf of your companies, I wanted to just give you an update of what we've been working on to put together the budget, which is $150,000. We have commitments from the Energy Foundation, SWEEP, some heat pump manufacturers, another Energy Foundation commitment. So we're up to 105,000. So we are able to intervene with the team that we talked about. And then, but we still have another 50,000 to go. So we're asking your companies that are affected the most to get involved and give me a call and talk about, what you guys would like to do. This is the heat pump. This is a forecasting document that's been developed by the heat pump group. And just wanted to put it up to remind everyone that this is the trajectory. We've got this deadline of 2030. And this is the cities, the utilities, the state. It includes the clean heat legislation that went through for the greenhouse gas map for Colorado Energy Office. All of those line up for 2030, 2040, and 2050. So right now, we believe that this 2023, right, is an inflection point where we're going to start to see the change that we've been talking about for the last couple of years in a much bigger way. So rallying around this is partially when we're looking at the rebates, and your industries is looking at where that opportunity is for the next 8 years in your business. And with that, what I'd like to do is just touch on two more things. One, Eebc, we mentioned before in our action groups that we know that workforce is one of the biggest factors in your ability to deliver in the field. And so the Eebc, we've created a partnership with the city of Denver, and we have an orientation program with Julius Education and ICAST, who are focusing on the lighting, insulation, air sealing, and HVAC heat pumps trainings. And if your company is a member of the action groups, you get first right of refusal to the graduates of that orientation training. And then also the graduates of the orientation can choose to go into heat pump specific technical training and come out with a certification. So there's some additional benefits to joining an action group and being involved in the policy action committee than just influencing policy, but working on getting a pipeline of labor. So there's that. And we do have on the phone our heat pump action and HVAC action group, Sean Lamont from Mitsubishi and Pete Perez from GA Larson is not on the phone, but so if you have questions, or Sean, you want to make any comments about the works that you guys are doing. Also, our lighting co-chairs, Mike Bryan from Renewable Luce, and then Scott Kelly from Colorado Lighting. And we are looking for some chairs for insulation, air sealing, weatherization, building envelope group. So that's what we have for today. Super appreciate everyone being here. Sean, did you want to make some comments about how to participate and what you guys are up to?
Hi, Patricia. Yeah, I actually have to run here shortly, but excellent meeting. Eebc has been just a pivotal partner for us, both on a utility side, on a market awareness side, product discussions around, and not from a manufacturer specific perspective, but from a market and an adoption perspective. I mean, this is a huge lift that we have ahead of us, and just having the conversations are critical, but having the right conversations and helping to guide where that goes and provide industry feedback to folks that are setting policy are it's a massive part of the conversation. I can't overstate it, really. You mentioned early on at the beginning of the meeting, you mentioned that this is going to be the fastest transition we've seen, and it's at this point, I don't know how else to say it, but it is a massive lift. It is an all hands on deck opportunity and requirement across multiple industries, across levels of trades, whether it be if you sit behind a desk, or you're selling at the kitchen table, or you're engineering, or you're writing policy or guidance for folks to do all that work. Any assistance that you can bring to this is huge. This goes back out to everybody. And if you're not donating, even if you're just a member of Eebc, talk to your organizations about supporting it, because Colorado is a national leader, and the nation is a bit behind other parts of the world. And I think that we can catch up drastically as we have the right conversations around how to combine the most complex system that we have on the planet, really, which is the US electrical grid, with the absolute need to make this transition thoughtfully, appropriately, in a timely manner. It's not a flip the switch kind of thing. We've got to put all the efforts into finding the right steps and the solutions. So sorry for my soapbox there. I just wanted to share that.
I super appreciate it. And I think that's where even the members who don't always attend the meetings realize that being a member is critical, because we're all working on your behalf. And, this is, the EBC is not, we're not putting together what we recommend as an organization. The members are giving the input and asking for what you guys want to see. And we're just the messenger, so it's a powerful group, and we have a lot at stake. So definitely get involved and look for those meetings in July. Absolutely. So, and thanks for all the co-chairs and all your hard work, to help organize our groups. It makes a big difference. So super appreciate it. Anything else before we go? That was our agenda today. Next meeting is September 15th, as a reminder, our quarterly membership meeting. And we're looking at exploring, are there enough contractors to support the electrification movement in Colorado? So we want to do a deeper dive into your challenges in that area. And then we will be giving updates as well on where strategic issues and the DSM plan is as well. So thank you everyone for our joining today. It was a packed agenda. Hopefully you found a lot of value in it. And if you have any questions or want to give me a call, please reach out. Appreciate it. Have a great week.